Hey guys and girls, Bored now back with you, and sorry this video is late, this review. I should never make promises like that, but here we are finally. This is my latest review of Euphoria, episode 7, the most recent episode, and it's the one with the bloody long but hilarious title. So here we go. It's called The Trials and Tribulations of Trying to Pee While Depressed. I'm sure we've all been there. And that, of course, refers to Rule in this episode, who's going through withdrawal symptoms. She's sort of dealing with Jules, the distance between them. I'll get into what's happening with Jules later in the episode because there's some interesting stuff with her in the back half of the episode, but she's gone away, a trip out of town to visit some friends. And Rule is really missing her, feeling the distance. She's also suffering from the fact that she's been off drugs for a while, so it's the whole psychological state of dealing with that. And we really see her freaking out in this episode and hallucinations, believing she might be suffering from bipolar. So we see her looking up the symptoms of that on the internet. But this is really, particularly the stuff with Rule in this episode, it's just genius. It's just so mind-blowing. It's one of those which this show does a lot, where there's definitely, it's obviously very uncomfortable at times, very dark and edgy, but at the same time it does bring out some really dark and entertaining humour. And I think what I really love about what it does with Rule in this episode is the fact that it obviously leaves it open to your interpretation on how much of this it's just her tripping out and imagining things, or how much it is, really happening. But what it does, which is what really makes this episode stand out for me and from Rule's plot, is she obviously suspects something fishy in the whole Nate thing. So we find out early in the episode that Nate, as a result of last week's episode, Taylor has taken the rap. It's either Taylor or Tyler, I keep forgetting. I think it's Tyler, actually. He's taken the rap for the whole thing with Maddie at the fairground. And obviously Nate blackmailed Jules into backing up that side of things. And Maddie's saying the same thing. So basically, for the time being, Tyler is screwed. He's been put away. But Rule's obviously cottoned on to the fact that it's not quite that cut and dry. She obviously knows something funny going on with Nate and Jules. She's seen that exchange of looks between them. I think it was at the Halloween party. So she's sort of cottoned on to the fact that something's afoot, let's say. And I think what's brilliant about this sort of plot is the fact that I think it plays into sort of what the show's saying about the fact that this sort of town, this kind of very where you have these sort of breakdowns in like structures and dynamics and sort of the wealth and the not, the well off, the not so well off, and the sort of popularity compared with the outcasts, is the fact that because of the power that Nate's family has, I think sometimes people would be willing just to believe that's it. It was Tyler. It's cut and dry and that. Either they want to believe that, or maybe they're too scared to really sort of question it. So what I like about this thing with Rule now playing detective, which I'll get into in a minute, is that on the face of it, she wouldn't be believed. And another reason for that is because of her issues with drugs. So I sort of like that aspect of it, the fact that to the casual like observer, you just think, Rule, you're just being paranoid, you're just tripping, that sort of thing, and she would be dismissed. So that plays into the whole point of the show. But at the same time, it really gives something interesting to Rule as a character. It really gives her something to sort of chase up and bite on. The fact that we know she's right about Nate. We know that he is involved and there is more to this than meets the eye. But it does this really great thing in this episode where it goes all sort of film noir with Rule. And again, you're not quite sure how much of this is meant to be real, but I mean, obviously she's not really dressed as like a, a character in a film noir, but obviously in what I mean is the stuff with her in the case and her and Lexi, which I'll get into. But so they do this whole thing where, I mean, part of it is her withdrawal symptoms. As I said, she suspects she might be bipolar. She's obviously missing Jules, and the stuff about going to the toilet. So in a way, she has this case to sort of focus on in between times, and this whole thing sort of starts with her basically. So again, it's another comment on the modern sort of trends and reality TV and the media. So basically, there's a gag about Rule watching like an insane amount of Love Island. I can't remember how many hours. It's something really crazy, like 25 hours of Love Island or something. And I do love the sort of argument she makes for it, sort of thing, and the fact that she just makes the case, and it's just so easy, casual sort of viewing that you don't have to work at, and that is the sort of logical case people make for that kind of shallow reality TV. It's just the fact that you can just put it on in the background, you can enjoy it. You don't have to think about it. It's just there, sort of thing. Which is probably similar to a lot of why, some mainstream films do as well as they do. Bad mainstream films are had. It's just because they are quite very accessible and easy to watch. But that's kind of the idea, rather than you really have to make the effort to get into them, to follow them, and do some of the work yourself. And at one point, Rule even makes a quip about Mad Men, sort of thing, about like the final season, which is really funny, actually. She's like making that comparison. It's not like hard work like the final season of Mad Men, which is great. And I've still not seen the final season, I'll be honest. But I sort of like that on the other end of things, because in a way, although Mad Men is AMC. It's part of those shows which is now considered part of like the golden age of TV. This really high standard, quality, real television drama. This move into more cinematic areas for TV, and so it's sort of like almost like an in sort of gag. The fact that Euphoria is a show on HBO, and it's kind of taking a little sort of dig at sort of high class, modern drama on TV. So really good stuff, some really witty stuff, but that's kind of how we open with Rule, and then she gets involved in this case. She starts trying to chase things up, and again, it's left open for you how much she's imagining. But just the whole riff on the film noir thing was just so entertaining for me, and it just makes it so cinematic, and it feeds into the kind of the haze of the show, if you like, the haze that Rule is in. And it's just a brilliant character beat, and I think it just shows what a great actress Sedano is again, because she just makes it really funny. She's just played a lot of different sides of this character, and she convinces in everyone, and she really goes for it in this. She really throws herself into that side of Rule, and it's great because, you know, it's this riff on film noir which she makes believable, but it's also, it really, she's bugging out, the eyes are going, she's really freaking out at the same time. So there's this hint of this is hysteria, you know, and she's not in the right frame of mind. You know, at one point she's drinking too much coffee, she's smoking a lot like a character in film noir. Yeah, there's some funny interactions with people, like her mother just shouts up the stairs at one point, "Go to bed, Rule," and Rule's like, "I'm not tired," and then she's on the phone to Lexi, and some of the stuff with Lexi is the funniest, because again, we're building this relationship again with Lexi and Rule, where Lexi has become this rock again for Rule. They're starting to rebuild their friendship after a bit of like separation, and obviously she's been there for her why there's been a difficult patch in the relationship with Jules. So there's this great back and forth where Lexi's trying to support her, but at the same time, you know, she just thinks Rule's being a bit sort of crazy. And so at one point, Lexi, maybe the line of the episode, she says, "You're too you're too close to this case," basically. And Rule just hangs up on her, basically. But yeah, "You're too close to this case" is a classic noir sort of line. And yeah, Rule is just saying things in like these noir type tones, and the lines, and you know, stuff like, "I'm gonna blow this case wide open," or something similar to that. But I do like the fact that Lexi is still this kind of this partner in crime to Rule, who's there on the sidelines supporting her. And yeah, there's some great scenes in this episode with those two and Rule, as I said, as the noir style character. So it's great fun, but it's sort of a good thing for her character to bite on. And a bit more on Rule is the fact, and this is still on the case, but so she gets in touch with her friend Fix, I think it's Fez, sorry, the drug dealer. Obviously they sort of made peace in the last episode. And she's obviously convinced that Nate is the guilty party in the whole Maddie thing, and that he's essentially messing in, obviously because of Jules' like connection, she's concerned about that. So she goes to Fez and asks him, you know, "You've got a gun, right?" And she doesn't go as far as to say, you know, "I want you to shoot Nate," but she does go as far as kind of saying, "Well, just scare him, just give him a warning." And I'll get to what happens actually with Fez and Nate later, but that's another thing with Rule going to Fez. And although Fez kind of says, you know, I'm not going to do that, that would be wrong, at the same time it does put him on alert, the fact that this is something that's bothering Rule, and that, you know, again, it puts his mind to the fact that Nate is trouble, and it just, yeah, when he bumps into Nate later, it's kind of a setup for that anyway. And I might as well mention that because that's most of Rule's plot for the episode. They come back to her at the end. So Fez happens to bump into Nate in the convenience store, and he does give him a warning. You know, he sort of says, he sort of outright, because at first he casually mentioned something about what's happening with Rule and what have you, and then Nate starts being, casually a jerk to him, and at first it's like the power is with Nate in the scene, but then Fez turns it around and just says, don't fuck with Rule and her friends, and he says it as a threat, and you can tell he means it. He's really serious, and I think this turns things around and sort of scares Nate a bit. So he does sort of back off, but then, I mean, this being Nate, he goes back to his underhanded sort of box of tricks sort of thing, because he's already run Fez down in the store because he's mentioned, oh. And again, he's using the class things, but you're a bum, you dropped out of high school early, and now you're a drug dealer. So he's really running him down. He's using his status, essentially, the fact that Nate comes from a rich side of town, a rich family, and his family has status, and Fez comes from the other side of the tracks. So he's really running him down. And then at the end of, or later in the episode, once all this has come out and Fez has made the threat, Nate being Nate, he calls the police on him. He knows obviously that there are going to be drugs at Fez's premises, so it's his way, first of all, of just getting his own back on Fez for the threat. But at the same time, it's a way of kind of neutralising that problem, if you like. It's a way of, putting him away, so there's no danger there. So I do like this episode in what it's doing with that and the case involving Nate, because it's, again, there's certain elements that pop up. There's a threat to Nate potentially, and he's kind of neutralised that. So, but it's, and then I'm assuming we'll come back and see what happened with Fez. So it's given Fez something a bit more to do as well, which I think is good. And actually, going back to Rule, because I've missed a really great scene with her. And I think it's something this show does when it's at its best. It's just this blackly comic scene, because I think in this episode and in some of the better episodes, it does manage to hook you in with a bit of like black comedy, a bit more of a surreal cinematic sort of vibe. And so there's a great scene where Rule is at Fez's house, and he leaves her alone because he has to, I think, answer the door or go off somewhere or something. It's after the conversation about him and the gun and Nate. And so what happens is Rule's obviously really paranoid, really high and tripping, and she sees like tablet bottles on the counter, and they start talking to her, because of course they do. So basically the lids are like the mouth sort of thing, so they're moving up and down and talking to her, and it's like, what is it? Oh, eat me, eat us all, eat us all. So they're like all talking to her, and it's a really trippy, freaky sort of scene. So yeah, stuff like that I really love. So the Rule side of things and the whole stuff with Nate and what have you is moving along quite nicely. And I'll come back to actually Jules and Rule at the end of the episode. So the flashback this week is to do with Cassie. So the focus is on her a lot in the episode as well. So we get another, obviously this is why she's sort of turned out this way. And again, the flashback stuff I'm a bit indifferent to, just because it's another, oh, well, this is why they turned out this way. And it's so much, it's, you know, again, it's recycled, it's, you know, broken homes, it's the fact that it's a messed up family, it's the fact that the character just from an early age had like a unhealthy like introduction to sex and a view of what sex should be in guys. And I mean, in Cassie's case, I mean, we see her father as this kind of, this sort of quite douchey sort of like roguish type character who well, we see him flirting with other women. We're never sure if he actually sleeps with any of them, but we see him flirting with other women in front of the mother, and we see the breakdown of their relationship, and we see how close Cassie is to the father, even when he's ill, and just how he lets her down, sort of thing. But I think just by showing her as like a kind of daddy's girl, it paints the picture of maybe, yeah, her attitude to men or the way she sees men. But yeah, again, it's just kind of predictable, the fact that they're saying, you know, every guy she goes with, she just feels she has to be sexy, it has to be all about the sex, and that's the way she views it. And that's kind of why Mackay or Christian is kind of special to her, because he is different. He appears to actually like her for being her. So again, it's all background stuff, but the one development we find out in this episode is that Cassie's actually pregnant, and she's talking to Lexi. Of course, they're sisters, so she's getting advice off Lexi. And again, Lexi is being very supportive and listening to her. And at one point, they've got like Maddie and Kat and all the others. They're over at and they're just sitting around the table, and Cassie is sort of coming clean about the stuff with Mackay, and Maddie's talking about her issues with Nate. I think she is, actually, from what I can remember. But later on, when Cassie and Lexi are talking, you know, just sister to sister, Lexi is again being just brilliant, just being this rock of support for Cassie. And at one point in the episode, she does snap at her, but just because, you know, she gets, I mean, I think it would grate on anyone after a while, but Cassie clearly has very low self-esteem issues, and yeah, just the fact that she's obviously clearly very good looking, but is very self-conscious. Is that enough? Is she good looking enough? And just making everything about her looks and her relationship. And at one point, Lexi does sort of lose it with her, but the other time she's very supportive. And I mean, it's her advice to Lexi which says, you know, you have to come clean to Mackay about the baby. You guys have to talk about this and sort out what you want to do for the future. And actually, if I'm pretty sure it's then Cassie tells the girls about the affair, if you want to call that, but the thing with the other guy. I'm pretty sure she doesn't tell Mackay about that. I could be wrong, someone might have to remind me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure she just tells Mackay about the baby. And I'm assuming it's Mackay's just because I don't think she slept with the other guy. You know, they fooled around and did a couple of different things, but I'm pretty sure she didn't sleep with Daniel, so I think the baby must be Mackay's. But Mackay, obviously, when she first tells him, is obviously not so keen, is put out. He is up front, which is fair enough because they are, you know, young characters. They are 17, 18, so it is quite a reasonable reaction to not be, that enthusiastic and say, well, is this the right thing for us? I mean, probably in the moment he is being a bit self-centered and not thinking about Cassie, but at the same time, there is a lot. There's a rationale there in the way he reacts, but then he does come around and he supports her, and he does put it as, I don't think, because he's partly talking about his football career, but at the same time he does say, I don't think neither of us are ready for this at our age. But I think by the end of the scene, he's sort of come around and been a bit more sensitive to her and says, I'll support whatever you want to do, basically. So that's sort of how it's left off with those two. There's a small bit with Kat where she and Maddie have a confrontation. It's at the dinner table scene. And again, Kat is very much, has turned into this more shallow, superficial person. And Maddie is now a bit more sympathetic than she was at the start of the show. And it's when Kat just, I think, cuts into Cassie about the whole thing with the guy and confessing, and Maddie really snaps back at her and calls her a C word, let's just say, and says, I preferred the old Kat where you had a bit more of a sense of humour, a bit more of a what have you, when you weren't so mean and nasty, sort of thing. So, I mean, I think, although I've been a bit indifferent on the Cat stuff, it's quite an interesting kind of role reversal between her and Maddie this first season. But anyway, there was just a small bit with Kat and Maddie, and then we see Kat still doing these cam sessions, and there's a really weird one where the guy, his voice is like all disguised and the screen is all black, which it wouldn't normally be, so she doesn't actually see the guy. But then I think it definitely hints by the end then it might have been Nate, because Nate has been using these kind of voice disguises when he's been calling people sometimes. So yeah, they're kind of flagging that up. So I mean, if you didn't already hate Nate and think he was a total sleaze and a scumbag, I guess add another thing to the list to make you hate him. But it's not confirmed, but I suspect it could be Nate because of the disguised voice thing, and it freaks Kat out a bit. So I'll end up by talking a bit about Jules, because she's not in much of the episode, but it's obviously mentioned. She's told Jules she's going away for the weekend, so she's visiting like an old friend back home. And her and Rue are in a kind of a transitional period where the pressure of Rue relying on Jules has started to get to Jules. We've seen last week she's acting out at the Halloween party. So she goes back home, meets with this friend. She also meets with one of her friend's friends, if you like, who's around. And the whole topic of sexuality comes up, and they go into the fact that Jules essentially is bisexual. The fact that she says she's more interested in girls at this point of view, at this time, and she says, I've got this new thing, which is, it's kind of, she does mention there are issues, but it is a positive thing. And she makes this point, and I think this whole back half of the episode with Jules' plot is kind of playing with her confusion over sexuality and gender. But yeah, she mentions about this guy she sort of started having a thing with, and she mentions it's really dark and kind of murky, and it is, of course, Nate. And so Nate is being played up as this sort of dark mystery man, and she's talking to her about her friends, and she's kind of saying, she has a line about, with this guy, if I conquer him, I can conquer femininity, sort of thing, is the line she says. It's a really striking sort of bit of dialogue. So she's opening up to her friends, and they're obviously interested. And again, some of this is all quite shallow stuff. I mean, her friends seem quite shallow. I mean, maybe naive. But they go to a rave, and obviously Jules, who she bisexual, she starts kissing and getting with this other girl. But it's one of these really stylish, trippy sort of cinematic scenes, and they're playing, that ELO track, "You're Not Alone," which gets played in a lot of stuff, and it's a beautiful bit of music. It's really haunting, cinematic, just beautiful, really intimate sort of song. And it's just perfect for this scene, that the sort of surreal hyperness of it. So she's kissing this other girl, but then suddenly Nate appears to be there. He's not really there. It's in Jules's head, but it's getting across the fact that Nate is hanging over her as this sort of ghost. And it's a very interesting thing because it plays into the sort of age Jules is, the fact she's at this vulnerable time. She's maybe still finding her sexuality, and so the idea of going with guys is a new thing. But in theory, she's sort of repulsed by Nate. But again, he's obviously an attractive guy, and there's something about this dark side to him which kind of appeals. But because of what's been happening with the case and between them, it's just something that's on her mind, and Nate hovers over her, whether it's because she's attracted to him or whether it's just because he's a constant at the moment and has been making her life really, really awkward. So Nate appears as a vision, as a whatever, a dream sort of sequence, so at the rave, and Jules freaks out, and I think it just hits that point so well, the fact that Jules is trying to conquer her sexuality, trying to get a grip on it, and at the same time trying to get a grip on her life as a teenager, as a young person. And I think so it plays into maybe a coming of age type thing with the show. But it's almost, if she can get a grip on Nate and her sexuality in this sequence, it's a big step for her in finding her way and overcoming this particularly dark point in her life. So Nate appears, and obviously in the vision he's kind of saying, I've never met someone so beautiful as you. And again, he's being this dark, mysterious, obviously attractive sort of guy. And Jules is obviously hit it, kind of get away, stay away from me, that sort of thing. And at one point she grabs him by the throat, drags him down to the floor, and they end up kissing. So again, it's wrestling with her attraction for him, wrestling with her dark side, wrestling with her sexuality, because then what happens is the Nate sort of dissolves and comes rule appears. So Rule's in this part of the dream or the fantasy, and they just lay together on the dance floor. It's a beautiful image. I think when the show really hits moments like this, it's really doing some effective stuff. So it was a great visual, and I love the whole metaphor of Jules wrestling with her sexuality, wrestling with her identity as a young person. It's a very powerful scene, very thought-provoking, and it pays it off really well at the end of the episode, because it ends with, you get shots of the various characters, which this show tends to do. So there's a nice thing with Rule and her mother, where her mother just comes in, and because obviously Rule's been distant throughout the episode because of this, trip sort of thing. So her mother just comes in, and I think they're laying in bed together, so it's a tender moment. We see Cassie telling her mother about the pregnancy, so that's kind of a nice moment between them. And at the same time, we kind of see, because I think when we see the shot of Rule, with her mother in bed, she's kind of staring off into the distance. So the idea is that she's thinking of Jules on the other side of the country, or in a few states away, whatever the case may be. And Jules, we see her the next morning. She comes out onto the roof, and she looks out over the skyline, and that's how it ends. So again, it's this connection between them. So they're thinking about each other in their respective places. So there's like this sort of instant visual connection. And also, I think the fact that Jules looks over the skyline is playing up this idea of her thinking about her life, the grander scheme of things. So she's looking out over this big sort of world sort of thing, and contemplating that. So it's all very well done, and this was a really good episode. I was really impressed, because I was starting to give up a little bit. The last maybe 2 or 3 haven't been so great, and it was getting a bit repetitive. But this episode brought it back round. I thought a lot of good stuff, and it has me intrigued. And it's an odd show, really. It's an odd one to judge, because there's lots I like in it. There's quite a bit I'm not so keen on, but this episode has brought it back around. I really liked the stuff with Rule. I thought the stuff at the end with Jules was really great, and just did something a bit different, which obviously the previous episodes haven't, maybe. And it does set it up nicely for the season finale. So, I mean, if it can have a strong end to the season, then it could really bring me out on a more positive place with it. And I might be, enthusiastic sort of thing going into season 2, if enthusiastic is the word with such a dark show. But anyway, that's episode 7 of Euphoria. I thought it was a really strong one, probably one of the best of the season. So if you've seen this episode, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I, of course, have been reviewing the new Netflix miniseries, the crime series Unbelievable, starring Toni Collette, Caitlin Denver, amongst others. And something I've been really enjoying as well. Really, really great stuff. So I'm going to be continuing with that. I believe it's episode 5 next time, so I should have a review of that coming up soon. And many more things. I'm going to do a sort of a cap off video for Buffy season 1. I recently finished that, so before I go into season 2, I will do a roundup of that. And of course, we're getting closer to October, where I'll be doing a shit ton of horror movie watches and reviews here on the channel. So let me know your thoughts of this episode of Euphoria in the comments below, and I'll see you guys soon. Good